Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven.
And my name is Marie. I'm one of your dev roles here at K6.
Oh, yeah, that too for me. I
We're
just
both
forgot to actually properly introduce myself.
yeah.
I was too focused on trying not to speak Tagalog with you like we normally do. But today, first thing on the list, version 0.43.0 of K6 out. Yay! New
Woohoo!
release. Some awesome things about this release. The first is that there are two things for that have been added to the experimental module. If you don't know, the experimental module is this new way in K6 to be able to try out different things that you used to have to build a custom binary for. It used to be that you would have different plugins and put them all together. Slowly but surely, we are putting some of those into experimental modules so that all they need is like an import, a line where you import that module. And one of the first few modules that we have for the experimental side is distributed tracing. And this one, is that what you're showing?
The tracing module. Yeah. So is that
Yeah.
yeah.
So you just have to import tracing from K6 experimental tracing, and it is you are going to be able to use it to instrument your HTTP requests, and then be able to see where those requests go on your tracing backend, something like tempo. So this
Yeah.
is a really cool way of starting it from the load testing tool itself. And then there's also, I guess, your thing is that one of the other experimental modules is
Yeah.
XK6 browser.
Yeah, so this is actually a really big release because XK6 browser started off as an extension, and although like at the beginning that was the intention, so we can provide different test types to K6 without really impacting the K6 core. There were some other issues associated with it. So for example, XK6 browser and K6, it was like separate projects, so our users would have to look at two different projects to track it and to raise any issues. And like even the command to run the test, it was also a bit different. So actually now it's now an experimental module, so we've updated our documents to reflect the different changes. People might notice because before we used to have an installation part of the get started, but we've remove that because you don't need to install anything. So if you're already using K6, as long as you have the latest version of 0.43, then you just need to change the import path. So before it was K6 slash x slash browser. Now it's the K6 experimental browser. And then in order to run the test, so there is an environment variable that you do need to set up. This is mainly for a security consideration, but in future K6 releases, we might turn this off. But for now, if you do want to run browser tests as part of your K6 scripts, you need to set K6 browser enabled to true. A really important part of this release as well is K6 now natively supports async await syntax. So from a browser test perspective, some of our asynchronous operations. So before we were using, the .then command in order to resolve the promises, but now you just have to use the async and await syntax as you can see here. There's also like an announcement blog about the K6 browser module. So if you want to know more as to why we merge XK6 browser into K6 core, like what's the migration plan for your browser tests, then head over to our blog and you can see the latest blog posts about it. It also includes like what's actually next in like future releases, because I know people are asking as well, when is this going to be available in our Cases Cloud? So we do have plans, but for now it's not yet part of Cases Cloud, but eventually it will be. So yeah, lots of exciting changes.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about this because sometimes people, the fact that you still have to build a custom binary of K6 to be able to try out XK6 browser, I think is a little bit daunting still. It's still an extra step for some people who kind of just, want to have a play with XK6 browser. So if that was you, then maybe try this out because it's easier than it was before to give it a go.
Yeah, way easier.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump into today what we wanted to talk about today, which was exploratory testing. I know you and I have talked a little bit about it, but we haven't really talked about our definitions for exploratory testing. So how would you define it?
So I think for me, if I define exploratory testing, so some people would see testing as scripted, where they follow a set of test cases and then they just focus on following that, and they find defects according to like a specific plan. Exploratory testing is when you're actually simultaneously learning about the system, especially if you want to if you want to discover unknown information about the application that you're testing with. You're simultaneously writing some tests as well. You're simultaneously designing it, so you're not necessarily following a specific test case. For me, exploratory testing as well lets you be more creative, because you can um, use different, like techniques. You're not just tied into a specific test case where you have to be rigid in following like specific steps. So I think for me, it's a completely different mindset that a tester should have when it comes to exploratory testing, and it just basically complements this whole scripted approach, this whole automation approach, because you do need both when it comes to testing your applications.
Yeah, so I just put in the comments your a link to your blog post actually on exploratory testing, which goes very much more into detail about what it is. But I also wanted to ask you because there's a section there where you contrast it with ad hoc testing. What do
Yeah.
you think is the difference between the two?
Yeah, so when I wrote this blog post, because I was reading a lot of excellent content as well from people from the community, so I've linked Callum Akers, Ryan's blog post about it. He's a really awesome like software tester, because I totally agree with his statement that there is this common misconception that exploratory testing is unstructured. Like some people think that, okay, I'm just gonna go explore without any plan at all. So ad hoc testing, like the goal is, you're trying to discover as many bugs as possible. But with exploratory testing, the goal really is, is to know more about the information that you're testing, uncover any unknowns that you might have, like prior to that, and then use that to fuel your next test, use that to assist your automation. So even though you don't follow specific test cases, it's still very structured in a sense that you need to have a plan, you need to have some like time limit as well, because you need to be able to narrow your focus. Because if you just say that, okay, I'm going to explore this website, but then you don't have any specific guidelines, then it really defeats the purpose of the whole exploratory testing approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, I I agree with most of it. I think I'm going to soft disagree, but it's a slight one.
Mm,
I think exploratory testing is one of my favorite ways to test, and that's because I think no other form of testing is as playful as this one. And I think that part of the tester's mindset or attitude really lends itself well to this kind of testing because it is play in a way that we often don't get to do as adults anymore.
yeah.
But however, I do think that there is a structured element to it, like there is with most forms of serious play. I think if we just wanted to do something brainless, then I would argue that that's not really play. That's probably something very passive. But play is like active, you're engaged with something, but there are also rules. Like pretty much any game that we have, there are going to be rules or traditions or sometimes even social norms that we have to follow. And I kind of think of exploratory testing as that as well. It's like part of it is structured. There are certain things that you might want to move towards. Sometimes maybe the beginning and the end are might be set, but the middle is kind of free form. How you get there is up to you.
Yeah.
But during so in the middle part, that part is like unstructured within the limits.
Mhm.
so so I think there's an element of both. Part of it is structured, part of it is ad hoc. What do you
Yeah.
think of that?
I think now that you frame it like that, then yes, exploratory testing. I think when some people just don't come up with a plan, like that's the part where I'm like, oh, you need to be able to know which specific area you want to focus, like what is your actual goal, what is the outcome that you want to find out. So in that sense, you do need to have some sort of structure, whether that's using like a charter template. So with exploratory testing, a very common type of template to use is this charter, where you basically like write what you want to explore, and then with what, so that could be with specific tools or with specific data, and then the outcome is the actual outcome that you want to I guess like find out about your goal. And then you need to be able to time box it as well. So like I think some people might say that the sweet spot is around like 30 to 60 minutes, and then anything longer than that, then you might want to, I guess, move on to another goal. And like, cuz like with your background as well with Obsidian, then you love notes. So note taking is also a very big part with exploratory testing. And I was doing it on my like previous role, where any notes that I have, I share it with my team. I try to make it as detailed as possible, so that if they have any questions on how I approach my test, and I can just share my testing notes with them. I can add like screenshots, I can add like annotations, and I can even add things where I would say, oh, this is like a really great feature, but have we also considered specific like like issues like that. So just try to make it as transparent as possible, and like share it like wider to the team. So I think note taking is a really big part when it comes to exploratory testing.
And this kind of touches on one question from Elibariki John, who asks, how is exploratory testing done in performance testing? So
Yeah.
you already talked about exploratory charters, which is
Yeah.
kind of like what I was alluding to, where you kind of have a direction. So it's not just like go anywhere. It's kind of like you have an idea, you have an area in mind that you want to test. Is
Yeah.
that sort of how you think about it as well?
Definitely. So, if I specifically talk about, so let's say if I'm testing a website and I want to, get an idea as to what the website performance is. However, I don't know any of the existing metrics. I don't have any existing documentations to tell me, oh, this is what it's supposed to be when it comes to specific response times. Then I'll use exploratory testing in a way of trying to discover that information. So I'm going to focus specifically on, let's say, if I visit a homepage, I want to explore that homepage with using tools like my developer tools, and then I want to check like what the different network responses are. I might also want to use tools like Google Lighthouse that's already built in, using if you're using Chrome. And then I can then use that information to basically check, okay, this is the specific outcome on this homepage. Because I think for me, like with exploratory testing, especially if you're trying to test an application that you don't have much information on, rather than trying to find like existing documents. And you might find some, but then I think it might be a waste of time. So rather than like spending a lot of time trying to find some hidden documents or whatever, it might be just a good idea to try and investigate it yourself. So with performance, there's no like difference. So whichever type of testing that you're doing, you'll always gonna be doing exploratory testing, because like when we come and see the application for the first time, like we're exploring it in a way that we want to like try to find a specific outcome. What really helps is you have this concept of like testing like heuristics that you can use, especially if like if you want to test an application, but like you want to have like a go-to set of techniques, a go-to set of guidelines that you want. So if I link this back, let's say, to performance, so if I'm testing the web performance of an application, one heuristic that I might use is the browser, different connectivity and different devices. Because when I just test in like a single browser, I can't just assume that the performance of that is the same across all browsers, is the same across all devices. So one heuristic that I might use is, okay, what if I use different browsers? What is the impact on the performance on that specific like functionality? Would that be the same as well, like for the backend performance, or would you use like different techniques?
Yeah, I think the idea is the same. I do think that there are some differences between front end and back end performance testing in terms of how you can explore it, because like at the beginning you were comparing exploratory testing to more traditional forms of testing, and you referred to it as scripted. And that's I think a point of difference, because a lot of exploratory testing techniques for back-end performance testing still require automation or scripting, unless you actually have like a data center, unless you're in, your machines, your application servers are actually on site or something, and you're physically going and unplugging machines, or doing something like that, interacting with them directly. Most of the time you're still scripting or automating it in some way.
Yeah. And I think um this is where like we can also say that um automation can definitely help with the exploratory testing approach, but I think the overall um act of doing exploratory testing, I think that part cannot be automated, but you can definitely use automation to help with your exploratory testing, which I think that that's the one that you just explained.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. It's not like exploratory testing isn't like running a single script or a single test suite that just does all of the things. It's more like for each individual step, whatever you want to try, maybe that small task could be automated.
Yeah.
But in terms of techniques for exploratory testing, you've already talked about exploratory charters. You talked about time boxing, which
Yeah.
is also like it's funny because it's a productivity thing. I think a lot of things that apply to human performance also apply to application performance.
Yeah.
And time boxing works when you're trying to learn something quickly. My question is, where do you think, when in a cycle, do you think exploratory testing should be done?
You can do it like anywhere, like not, I mean, like anywhere as in the context of like software testing. So you can even start as early as you can. If you are part of like a requirements gathering session, then you can do exploratory testing in that sense, where you can question the ideas, you can question the design, you can test like the different acceptance criteria that you and your team have decided. So it's not just about actually exploring the application, you can also explore like the different, processes, like the different like designs that, your team have created. So for me, you can do exploratory testing in any, parts of like the like software development lifecycle, um which makes it like really impactful, because if you just do the scripted, testing, or the automated type of testing approach, you just really focus on that in a particular cycle. But then what about like the other part? So there's still a lot of information that, you need to gather. So from a performance, again, if I relate this back, so let's say at the beginning you want to discuss with your team what kind of performance budgets, you want to want to basically have as part of your project. Then you can question, you can like ask like the team like different set of questions related to that. So that to me is a form of investigative type of testing, which in turn is exploratory testing.
Yeah, I don't know. My impression is that backend performance testing is a little bit closer to is a little bit more exploratory by its very nature, because I feel like with a lot of manual testing, for example, it's
Mhm.
very sequential. It's like first do this, then do this, and there are steps that you follow, and that's why you can also automate some of it. But I feel like with backend performance testing, you have test cases or you have situations, but a lot of it you decide what to do next based on the results of the previous test. And because, when you apply load to an application, it can react in many different ways, and some of them quite unexpected.
Yeah.
So I think there is a big element of exploratory testing just inherent in backend performance testing, which is what makes it so exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because if I remember from like my previous project, so we're running some, load testing as part of, one of the APIs that we are like responsible for. And I remember like one of the questions that we were having is, okay, so what if we just increase, the number of views, or what if we like decrease the time? So we're, doing some investigating work as well in there, because we want to actually see what is the limit of, our API. And that is, one of like, I guess, the goals when it comes to backend performance testing, is you want to test the limits, especially if you're doing like stress testing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so another thing that I think you could do, like in terms of techniques, is kind of like role playing and addressing, accessing an application with a customer persona or a user persona in mind. So, sometimes maybe your tests, especially for backend performance testing, you might only have the happy path of like a normal user with like the base level permissions. But what if you are an admin instead, or something like a super user with extra permissions? It can be interesting and informative to step into the mind of somebody else that
Yeah.
you didn't really script for.
Yeah, I think definitely using personas is something is a technique that I have used before. Not just with, performance testing, but if you're also doing other types of testing like accessibility, then, having like different persona to adapt and just to think from that type of, perspective is really useful, because it can also, I guess, improve how we perceive the applications from like different users, because like something that might be performant to us might not be as performant to others, especially when we're talking about the perceived performance, because that is very subjective. Like how we measure time objectively, like it's like different from how we actually experience time. So to me, yeah, like having different personas, like for example, if you're testing the web performance, and maybe you can have a persona of, okay, as someone who, is like a bit older, like what is the expected performance, that I want in a particular website or something.
I think it's super interesting that we're talking about work, but a lot of it is intertwined with play.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the psychology as well.
Yeah, I I really love role playing games. I play D&D and several other similar systems every week, and I think that there's a lot to be learned in terms of empathy, and a lot of it you can take to work as well. So I
True.
think that one of the advantages of putting on slipping into a user persona is that you start to think about representation. What is it like for someone who's blind to navigate an application? That's an operational concern that is very often missed.
Mm-hmm.
And you only really understand that when you pretend to be that, when you look at an application from somebody else's point of view. Maybe it's a point of view that you don't share.
Yeah. Speaking of like heuristic, because it might be helpful to like as an answer to Eli Bariki's question. So there is this heuristic which is called RAIL. So it stands for the response, animation, idle, and load. So you can basically use this heuristic if you just want to focus on testing the performance. So you can have a look at the response times, like if you perform specific actions, what are the different response times, like how long did it take for some data to come back, or how long did it take for a specific element to render on the page. So you can use that. And then animation as well, so especially with web performance. So if there's some animation that's taking a long time, then you can use this as a guideline. And when you're idle, so when you're waiting for some information, um, is there additional sort of extra messaging that gets presented? So is it basically saying, oh, we're actually trying to get your data, rather than not displaying anything? So if you think about it, it's much better to have some form of explanation when it comes to waiting on some specific response, rather than looking at a loading spinner, because that is quite annoying. And then the load, so especially if you're doing backend performance, then you can definitely try to increase or decrease the load depending on your requirements. So I think this is a heuristic that you can definitely use when it comes to performance testing.
I wonder if you can also share that awesome cheat sheet that you found.
Ah,
I
yes.
think it's from our friends at Ministry of Testing. And I thought it was really interesting because I feel like there are a lot of like catchy acronyms. I don't know if we have that many in on the
Yeah.
back end performance side, but like this whole rail thing, it's very cute.
Yeah. So we're gonna share the link to the chat in a
I
moment.
can do that.
Yeah, so if you just go to Ministry of Testing, they have a really awesome compilation of test heuristics cheat sheet that you can use, because it is hard to memorize like all the different techniques. So this was something that I was using as well when I was testing as part of my previous role, because it has a lot of like different examples. So especially if you're testing the functionality of your application, like there's different types of like strings as an input that you can use. I guess from a performance perspective, because when it comes to backend where you are testing the different APIs, I think for me some of the heuristics that apply to API tests can also be extended to the performance side. So just when you're testing for it for a specific API, you can just extend that to also, okay, how about the performance side of things? How performant is it, or how scalable is this API when it's exposed to like a high number of loads? So yeah, I think like for the most part, the heuristics listed here are, I guess, for the functional side, but I think yeah, like you can definitely extend some of it, especially the API ones.
Okay, so I think maybe how would you use it? So let's say that you have a website that you want to test. Do you just go down the list, or how would you use it?
the first thing that I would do is I would create like a specific charter. So I think I've added it as part of that blog post that I have, where there's like an example template that you can use. So this was something that I really enjoyed using. So if I just share this again, because it really like just breaks it down into the actual goal that you want. Let me just increase that. So the charter definition format is you're trying to explore, like, the target application with whatever resources that you have. This could be a tool, this could be, different data, like this could be like even like an automation, tooling to discover like a specific information. I don't think I've added one here for performance, but for example, you have a charter for security, you have a charter for accessibility, so you can just easily create one for the performance. So from that perspective, like now that I have a specific charter that I want, then I can just focus on that. And I can also time box my specific session. So let's say for the next 60 minutes, I'm just gonna really explore this particular site, and I'm gonna check like what the web performance is. I'm gonna check like what the different metrics are as well that Lighthouse is reporting to me, or any other tool. So I think as long as you have that clear goal, that is the most important thing. And once I've done a bit of exploration, so if I want to automate the functionality that I just tested, so we were talking about K6 browser, for example. So I can then use K6 browser to write a specific script to test the user journey. And then at the end, I can see that the different response metrics are reported. So I can use those metrics to basically check if it's still aligned to how I've seen it like the first time that I've explored the system. So this is a great example on how both exploratory testing and automation goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I think this is to extend the playing metaphor. These are the rules of the game. That's how I think of it. It's like, hey, this is the win condition. You have to get to this point, or you have to explore this point. Here are the things that you can do and can't do. Here's your time limit. Go.
Yeah,
And I think that thinking about it from that point of view, from coming from a more playful attitude rather than just like, okay, now step one, now step two,
yeah,
that really distinguishes it from the more heavily scripted, heavily structured approach. And
yeah.
it also, I love it because this is when we can get creative.
Yeah, and I think as well, so just to display, just to show Leandra's comment here, like our senior performer, um, you will find different bugs when it comes to doing exploratory testing. So he mentioned here that yep, you might find that when you explore different components, so this could be a specific charter for your goal. You might say, oh, I just want to explore like images, videos to see how that impacts my web performance. And you wouldn't really notice that if you're just following a specific, test case. So it really finds like different bugs. So you do have to use it like hand in hand, because you might find major defects that your test case might miss, or you might find that you actually don't know enough about a specific feature, and that's where you can definitely use exploratory testing.
And you also, for on the back end side, you also called my attention to a heuristic that is also cutely named that I had never heard of. Vader. Can you tell us about that?
I think I found that, because so that is like a really popular like API heuristic, where it's, so let me just paste it in the chat so we can share it as well. So Star Wars fans. So it stands for verbs, authorization, data, responsiveness, and errors. So this is a great example of how I said that a heuristic for an API test can also extend to performance, especially in this part because it has it has an area that focuses on responsiveness. So you can definitely use this heuristic where, okay, after you've tested the functionality, like what's the actual, responsiveness? How is the user experience? Because something that works functionally doesn't mean that, it's actually like performing well. So by having like this like mental shortcut that if you think of Vader, oh, I have to think of the responsiveness as well. And like same with the errors. So you can also test like the different performance. Also say if you have a 404 page, then you can measure like the performance of that as well. So yeah, I think this is another heuristic that I think people need to use when it comes to performance testing.
Okay, and also with on the heuristics front, I think it's worth noting that a heuristic can also be considered kind of like a mental model. With it's like a way to think in systems rather than trying to, because we talked earlier about how sometimes testing is very reactive.
Mm-hmm.
However, there are still a lot of things that you can kind of extract from that, abstract out from the very specific experience of that test and that result, and try to apply it to other systems or other problems that you see. If you see database issues in one project, then next time that you come across that particular database in another project, it can be useful to think about what you've done in the past and what other issues you've found. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's why heuristics are really a useful place to start, but
Yeah.
they shouldn't be like the be all and end all, right?
Yeah. And you can also create, your own heuristic. So if you have like a go-to technique or like a go-to like check that you always do when you're testing an application, then, you can create like a heuristic for it and share that with the rest of your team. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to share something. Okay, this is in an application called Obsidian. It's my note-taking tool of choice. You don't really have to use this, but this is just how I'm showing it. I am going to post my a link to my notes on exploratory testing in general. So I was thinking that I know that you said that the goal doesn't always have to be to find defects, but I also think that in the course of exploratory testing, you do end up finding a lot of defects and then also improving application quality.
Mm-hmm.
Paula is giving me crap for Obsidian for using Obsidian again. Yes, another thing that I another goal I think for exploratory testing could be, like you were saying, just exploring the application, especially at the beginning when you may not really be that familiar with an application. It,
Mm-hmm.
it it doesn't make sense to start writing test cases immediately. There is a period of time where you just have to play around with the application and examine the affordances or the things that you can do with the application, the things that you can use it for.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like in from your blog post, I picked up sharing knowledge about the application within a team, especially if you have notes that you send to others, or if you're doing it in public. Then that's also one of the goals that exploratory testing can help you with. And in general, you're also lowering the risk of shipping code. Not everything can be foreseen or expected, so having a budget for exploratory testing can really help you focus on high risk areas.
Yeah, I think that last point is really important as well to emphasize because when you're just using like your test scripts, you don't normally adjust for like any risk that might arise. When you're testing the application, whereas with exploratory testing, then you can adjust, your goals so that it's more like focused on like the different like high risk area. And if there's like certain features that have recently changed, then you can also question like what are the risks of doing that change, like what's the product risk, what's like a feature risk, like all those things. Whereas if you're just doing a scripted form of testing, like the traditional way, then you wouldn't really include like all those questions.
So I didn't find something for backend performance testing that you had, like the one you had from Ministry of Testing, but I did start to create my own. Okay, so this isn't supposed to be exhaustive, okay? But this is how you can kind of use your past experiences to inform, things that you try in the future. This is a way to abstract from those experiences and learn from it, and I'm posting a link to exactly what I'm showing here. But I just wanted to show some ways that I think about it. So, like here, I kind of separated it into a few different kind of sections: code, the problems in the code itself, problems with the script or the actual test. Sometimes the issues that we find are related to how we tested, which is not a good thing because we want tests to be as clean as possible. The infrastructure of the application, and also the psychology, which I know you are also a big fan of as well. A lot about performance is related to the psychology of the users and the testers, us as testers, and that really informs it. And then there are also just general principles for testing. So, for example, when you look at your code, even things like, oh, I can't remember where I heard about it. I think it was actually in one of our colleagues' presentations about chaos testing. How a lot of errors in the code have to do with the fact that there's some features or bugs that haven't been addressed yet. Like
Mhm.
maybe do a search for to do in the code.
Yeah,
It is
yeah,
a surprisingly simple way to improve application quality.
yeah. Because like I think there's this like correlation as well. So the number of lines in your code, especially if you have like a big JavaScript file or like a big CSS file, that can also impact the performance of your application because it's much larger, and then when the web is rendering that, if a file is larger, it will take time. So it's good that, yeah, I think this is a really great heuristic for, because it might be things that that are like low hanging fruits that we can just easily remove. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I scroll down a bit here, things about the script. So, for example, have you considered whether the cache that you're using in the script, the caching behavior, is analogous to how things are done in this situation that you're testing? Like, does your application actually cache things? If so, which types of resources does it cache, or requests does it cache? Or like, are you correlating dynamic data? So are you just hard coding something and sending that in a request to the server? So these are just things that can kind of stir up your creative juices. Or like for infrastructure, one thing, I mean, chaos engineering or chaos testing is always something to consider, but it isn't always part of like a test suite. So maybe these are some ideas for where you can start to think of improving some things. And it doesn't mean that, if that you have to do absolutely every single one of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have the time, right? But just if you do have the time, these are excellent points for exploratory testing.
Yeah. And then,
And
yeah,
then
the psychology. Yeah.
a bit about the psychology of users and testers as well. For example, what are the consequences of speed? So assume that you are successful in your test, and you are successful in improving the quality and general performance of your application. What else is true about the rest of the application further downstream? So think about things even outside of the computer parts. What about the human parts? Because I've been in projects where we tuned the computer parts to a T. Like it was awesome, everything went well. what about customer support? Like, what are the effects of your application being super fast? Maybe just because the application is super fast, that doesn't mean that customer support suddenly has enough people to actually handle, the support load for whatever it is that your application does. That's
Yeah.
part of the psychology. That's the people part of the
Yeah.
entire system.
And I think that really relates to this concept of this whole continuous testing approach, because just because you've deployed, or that you're done testing in production, it doesn't mean that you are finished, because like you said, there are other areas as well that also gets impacted. So as a tester, you can help, like facilitate, or just ask questions around specific processes, and then um in feed it back to your team, so at least that can be like further improve as part of like a further iteration. So this really like highlights the importance of that approach.
Yeah, and then also there's some principles just for testing in general. So if I bring that up, I have another note for that where these are tables of just general overarching principles. Like, the goal of testing is to prove something is usable, not that it works, because works it means many different things to many different people. Yeah. So that's also one thing to think of. And in the heuristics page, I don't know if you noticed, but again, this element of play, I have dice here. I mean, I actually physically also have dice just handy on my desk, but I really think that you can use dice at work as well, because these are effectively random tables too. And I am a big fan of randomness being able to break you out of a creative rut.
Yeah.
And that really lends itself well to exploratory testing.
Yeah.
So I have in Obsidian this way to roll on this table and randomly select one. So, you can just click on these dice and then think, hey, is there a way that I can load the minimum necessary components first? Am I already doing that? Am I doing it sufficiently? Is there a way to eke out a little bit of performance improvement from this? And this is like when you don't have that much time. I mean, in an ideal world, you do everything, but you know, we don't live in an ideal world. So sometimes it can be enough just to like roll some dice and see what happens. And, don't feel like you have to do whatever it is that you get. If something doesn't make sense, then re-roll it.
Yeah, and I think this will um like force, I guess, like software testers to be really creative, because like I've heard, this comment of, okay, I'm done, testing, like I don't know what to test anymore. So having this sort of concept can really put you out of that particular spot, and you can just be creative. It improves your like thinking skills, your the way you the way you deduce like different behaviors as well. So it really improves like your overall I guess like skill like as a tester, because this is the great part. Like you can like explore, you can do different types of testing, and you're not just limited to like a particular like script or a particular tool. There's a lot of things that exploratory testing can cover that other areas like automation or scripting like cannot cover.
So we talked earlier about Ministry of Testing. Have you heard of Test Sphere? I
Testing.
think they,
Yeah.
yeah. So I actually have that. It
Yeah.
is it is a game. It is certainly taking the play metaphor to its fullest. It is a game that also comes with a bunch of cards. So here's my copy. This is like not sponsored. I just bought it myself.
We
So
have
it has like different colored cards, and
yeah.
I think they're categorized as well. Like, I think the purple ones are like feelings and stuff. So the idea is that you can use these cards in the same way that I used like the random tables that I have. For example, this one says fluency pattern. Well, you can't read that, but it says fluency patterns. Approach. Are there long wait times, pauses,
Yeah,
loading screens, or interruptions? And
yeah,
then there are some points. And how you use this is really up to you. You could use it on your own,
yeah,
or you could discuss it within a
yeah.
team.
Virtual
Um,
or in person, yeah.
yeah, so I think I love this sort of thing because it's like it's fun to like choose a card, and everybody gets to choose something and then you can discuss it. And like it's fun, but it's also helping the application. It's getting you closer to that goal.
Yeah, it's really great that you brought that up. So last year I participated on that activity. So Test Bash, they had this like activity session, and one of the activity was about test fear. And it's really great because it really like forces you to think outside the box, because like we all have our own biases, like especially if you're doing something for a really long time. So at least with this, it gives you like a different perspective on how to test your application. And the other card that you mentioned, you can really use that when it comes to performance testing.
So I wonder if you've heard of this book called Six Thinking Hats.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it yet. Yeah, but I've heard it from like my previous manager.
So it's a book by Edward de Bono, and this is not somebody who's in tech or testing at all, but I think it is really interesting because he has this concept of different hats that you can put on, kind of like what we were talking about with the user personas. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea is that each hat has a different outlook. So, like blue thinks about thinking. If you have the blue hat on, you think about processes and how are we responding to production incidents, or how are we doing our testing? Does our testing affect the results that we're getting? So there are different hats and different ways of thinking, but I think that this is also like a heuristic, a model, a mental model for thinking. So I made this thing called the six performance testing hats. So
Wow.
blue is metacognition still. Are we focusing on the right thing? White is all about facts, doesn't care about intuition or anything. It is looking at what you can actually prove. Red is more intuitive. It's bringing in your experiences and gut reactions. Black is criticism, like what could we have done better? But
Yeah,
yellow is positivity, things that we did well. And creativity is just like resourceful things that are a little bit out of the box.
I love
And sorry?
I love this.
I love the idea of having hats because it's like sometimes we don't want to be the negative Nancy's, like we don't want to be the one that says, oh, we could have done this better. But you know what? Sometimes we need that. And the fact that they're hats means that like everybody knows, hey, I'm not negative. It's just that I'm putting on this hat right now to help the team.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really awesome way, to put things into perspective. Because like especially like with the other hat where it's just about the facts, like you can't really ignore that sometimes. And it's great as well that like you do have to test the logs, see if there's anything like out of like the ordinary. You have to check like the dashboard, see if like when you and your team deploy the specific feature, are the response times still you know on like the normal like response, or has it actually gone up, or has it gone down. Then those are the things that you have to raise with your team. So these different hats really enforces those. So, and I love the drawings. Did you do those drawings?
I didn't draw them. I took them. I mean, I took them from like a copyright free site.
Really good.
But
I
it's
think,
just to illustrate the point that they're also different looking hats.
yeah. I think you should share the link to that in case other people also want to read more about it.
Yeah, sure. I will also do that.
Yeah. There's
Okay,
also
so
a really nice comment here from Rose. So thank you for going over all of this. I didn't realize I already kind of do this type of testing, and now I'll be better able to use it. Yeah, I think with most of the stuff that we're doing, we don't put any labels or names on it, but it's actually like we are doing exploratory testing every day, especially as a software tester. You might not even realize it, but yeah, we're already doing it, like you know in every, I guess, type of testing that we do. Like it's just like natural. Yeah. And
yeah,
here.
this is like one of my favorite parts about being a tester is that it is putting on like a hat or a mindset of continuously playing, of being constantly curious about what we see and questioning everything in a productive way.
And you get to roll a dice.
Yeah, I mean, if you're me, yeah, I love it. But also, I think when we're talking about why exploratory testing is necessary, I think that it's important to note that testing shows the presence of defects, not their absence. So just because you see just because you don't find defects doesn't mean they don't exist. And there's also something called the pesticide paradox, which is that at some point, if you use too much pesticide, the insects or the bugs actually become immune to it. So this is why exploratory testing is super useful, because when you're in a project long term and you have this nice back and forth between you and the
Mm,
developers start to understand what you're testing for, and they start to code so that you don't find those defects, which is a good thing. Like that's supposed to happen. But
yeah.
sometimes you do get to a point where it's like you're not finding defects anymore because you have good developers who are responsive. So
Yeah.
what do? Well, that's the time to shake things up.
Yeah. And also, like, we like, as humans, we don't necessarily follow a specific plan. Like we use the system differently. When people say like, oh, don't do that, you have to use it in a specific manner. But reality is we use applications in a different way. And this is why, like, traditional way of testing, like test cases can't really capture all those errors, because um us humans, we're just very, like, we don't follow the rules all the time, well, most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we are usually irrational. And we need to test in a way that takes into account that irrationality. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no point trying to ignore it. I love that, at K6 we always do a week of testing,
Mhm.
and different people focus on different things. And I remember your week of testing, Marie. You talked about a lot of accessibility issues that I don't believe anybody had ever done yet.
Mhm.
So like that's the kind of thing that can arise when you're doing structured play, when you are working but exploring, and really tapping into your creative side.
Yeah, I like that.
And then also, I think like when we were talking about the two different hats, one is like intuition and the other one is facts. I
Yeah.
think that both are needed. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, was it? And he distinguishes between what he calls slow thinking and fast thinking. Slow thinking is the more methodical part, the one that looks at facts, the one that always does everything logically, and we need that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also need fast thinking, which is informed by experiences, and it's like intuition, but not in the sense of guessing. It's like educated guessing, because you are a tester that has seen other issues before. And we really need both kinds, because slow thinking can tend to be too bogged down in the data, and it can take too long, and we don't always have the time to puzzle everything out to the nth degree. So if you can just like take an intuitive leap, you
Yeah.
know that's one of the values that we can bring to a testing team, to a project team.
Leandro is asking, what type am I if instead of a hat I get a sombrero?
You can make a sombrero of any color.
I think you should create your own testing hat Leandro.
Yeah, but also it's super useful to trade hats every now and then. Like, maybe also give the sombrero to other people and have them try what it feels like to wear that. And that way you don't get into this like a blame game where, oh, this person always just looks at the facts or whatever.
And it's a great way as well, like to not just rely on a specific person. So the more you share like different hats to, the rest of your team, then, the I guess in terms of performance testing, then we're not just dedicating that to a specific person. Then that can also be done by, like by developers, by, other people as well. So it's great to just like collaborate within that.
So, just to close up, what are we doing next week? Or what are you doing next
Oh
week?
my gosh. So next week, it's gonna be a really great episode because it's the first time that we're gonna have two of our K6 champions. I'm not gonna announce who because it's gonna be a surprise. We're gonna make an announcement next week, obviously with like once we've shared it. But yes, it's gonna be like an ask me anything type of episode. So if you have questions to any of our K6 champions, we're gonna have two of them, not one but two. Then be prepared to ask these questions right away, and we'll just talk to them as well about their experience of being a K6 champion so far, like what have they been doing, because they have been really busy, like some of them with their K6 advocacy. So Leandro will join me with that one, so yeah, I look forward to that.
Yay, that should be fun. Thank you for doing this with me, Marie. It was an awesome conversation, and thank you everybody who was here listening to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone.
Have
Bye.
a good weekend. See you next week.
See you.